This is IA Forward, your playbook for success as an independent insurance agent. Here to help you knock it out of the ballpark are your hosts, Shane Tatum and Tonya Lead.
Welcome to IA Forward. Shane, let's talk finances and the economy. I know you kind of pride yourself on being an amateur economist. So let's talk about what's going on in the world and how it's affecting our industry.
I should have majored in economics and not finance.
Wait a minute. I thought you majored in baseball.
Definitely a more true statement that I was majoring in baseball. I wish I could have gotten my degree in baseball. When I think about the economy and I think about the world of economics, it just fascinates me. And so, yes, amateur economist would be the best way to term that. I'm not sure that gives people warm and fuzzy confidence feelings.
I was thinking we upgrade that to semi-professional economist.
So now I'm a semi-pro. That's great. I've seen that movie, and that doesn't carry the best connotation in my mind. It is fascinating, and I do read the Wall Street Journal daily. There's some things you pay attention to and some writers you pay attention to. There's some writers that you dismiss. And you kind of have to figure that out for yourself. And I think we take these broad strokes to news today and say things like CNN's terrible and Fox News is terrible or whatever. There are segments of all news organizations that are good, that have good, truthful, factual journalism still going on. And then I think there are plenty of dramatized infotainment journalists, if you want to call them that, out there peddling their stories in the world. The Wall Street Journal is no different, but there's some really good stuff in the Wall Street Journal too.
What are you seeing right now that gives us hope for our industry in a time that we're all struggling?
Number one, read about some indicators going on. Just some of the headlines from a recent internal conference call that we were involved with. Things like pay raises are finally beating inflation. Economists are cutting back their recession expectations. Inflation goes down. Soft landing odds improve. Shoppers increased retail spending in June. These are headlines of articles from Wall Street Journal's economy section. There's indicators that things are not necessarily going the way that the economist originally feared, that interest rates were going to be raised, and they were dramatically raised, and we created some deposit scares with some banks, and banks sitting on their heels and getting into trouble because they were actually kind of getting greedy about it because they weren't being proactive with their interest rate cycle on the pay side. They were being really, really quick to raise interest rates on their lending, but not very quick to raise interest rates on their deposits. And so that cost some banks and created some problems for some banks. That gets the headlines, but you take that aside and you look at what has happened with the interest rate cycle, and it's amazing to me how resilient the American economy has been. And that has a lot to do with how much money was pumped into the economy through COVID and post-COVID. And what's interesting is that the insurance industry typically, as the long cycle nature that it is, it follows and lags the general economy as far as the shapes and turns and twists that it will make in its outlook, in its progress. And so the indication right now is that things are on the up. And so if you look at that, then I think there's an outlook for our industry that will eventually trickle down to the insurance industry as we kind of go through our problems right now.
Do you think that increase has to do with prices going up? Do you think people are still borrowing money? What do you think is causing that increase? And do you think that that continued increase is going to help us or hurt us as rates continue to go up within the insurance industry?
As I think about this, and I have thought about this, is one of the things that I've done over the last several years is really start paying attention to what's going on around me. And what do I see? Not necessarily what do I read or what do I hear. Ironically, what do I hear other people talking about, which is kind of what we're doing here. Isn't that a little hypocritical of us to say that? But be careful who you listen to. That's an interesting thought coming from somebody doing a podcast.
You can listen to us. We really like that.
I mean, I just think it's kind of funny to say that out loud. But I mean, there is truth in that. Be careful who who you listen to. I like to pay attention to what I see. And so let me preface my answer with this. What I see is I see full capacity restaurants. I see crazy traffic. Even in rural areas, I see crazy traffic. I recently went on vacation. We went to Florida to the beach and went past your domain there in Pensacola, and the traffic on I-10 between Baton Rouge and Pensacola is insane. We did the Griswold family trek out to the Emerald Coast, best beaches in the world, by the way.
Absolutely.
Amazing stuff, but packed. We went to 30A. 30A is a little bougie.
A little
bougie. Matter of fact, we're in trouble. Wall Street Journal article just the other day talking about 30A, talking about Rosemary Beach, Santa Rosa, talking about Seacrest, Seaside, and called it the Hamptons of the South. That's not going to help us with less crowds. Katie barred the door. People are about to just flock down here. And so these rental condos, these houses, the shops, the restaurants, man, country come to town once a year. We go over to 30A and we play bougie. That's just what we do. It's kind of fun. It's kind of like playing dress up for us.
We live over in the redneck Riviera area of Pensacola, Gulf Shores, Orange Beach, Fort Morgan. So yeah, those are the fancy people that live over there.
They're fancy. But here's my point of all that. It was packed. People are spending money. Vacations, vacation traffic is through the roof. So what I see is that our economy is kind of kicking butt, all right? Yes, prices are up. Yes, inflation kicked our butt over the last couple of years. And now in the insurance industry, we are trying to play catch up. And the problem with our market outlook for the insurance industry is we have this perfect storm scenario that has happened to us. One, we sit on our tail and followed the PR political route during COVID. We refunded money. We became followers instead of leaders, and we made some decisions that obviously we couldn't see into the future. They weren't loss cost inflation measure soundness. And when all this money started getting pumped in to the economy, when you saw the price of lumber, when you saw the price of vehicles and used car vehicle prices and inventories shrink and all that stuff happen, you knew that there was a storm coming. You knew this was going to happen, and it is happening. To me, it's not shocking, because the perfect storm part of that is we've had some catastrophes along the way on top of that. And then because of our development towards the coastal regions in the United States over the last 5 decades, my contention is we're behind in terms of pricing. Our auto insurance pricing, our home insurance pricing, we are behind the 8 ball. Because we were behind going into COVID, now we're amplified being behind because of inflationary measures and all the increased cost. What I think is we are going to see this continued increase for a little while longer. We're going to get back to profitability. We're going to see that level out, but wages are going up. Earnings are also going up across the averages, and we're going to get back into a positive place. It is a cycle. It may feel like the worst cycle in a generation. Maybe it is the worst cycle in a generation, but we've been here before.
I want to go back to the statement that you made about the whole refund thing during COVID. And I'm a marketer. It's what I do. But you and I had the conversation when carriers decided to do this. This was a really dumb idea. And the same time that this was happening, we had a Cat 3 hurricane that was hitting in the Florida Panhandle during COVID. And then there was a Cat 5 during COVID that hit down in the Keys area. And so just thinking about those two incidents alone that happened during COVID when people weren't driving and things were changing so much within the world and within our industry, and we had so much uncertainty, I just think that was such a huge mistake. From a marketing perspective, it was great. It was warm and fuzzy, but I just don't think that the long-term effects of that one warm and fuzzy moment were worth the long-term negativity that's being created now.
So that we're not accused of playing Monday morning quarterback. We have witnesses. We are on record of saying we thought that was a dumb idea. All right. So it's not we're saying this for the first time. It was a bad idea. We followed the political pressure. We allowed the political pressure to get to us. The PR side of that decided to let one company who decided to do that, might have been State Farm, probably was State Farm because they had unbelievable surplus at the time, still do to a degree. But we allowed that to get in our way, right? That PR marketing pressure.
Because none of us right now, when we're dealing with this hard market, are going to say, but you remember that refund that you got in 2020 during COVID? We're not doing that. Most people have forgotten about that, actually.
This is why single off one-time bonuses or pay raises alone, they're just short-lived. People feel good for the moment, but they don't feel good forever. Giving clients that refund was definitely a short-lived scenario. They don't remember it now. It's just the reality of it. That's the downside to that. It just further put us into the hole, and it further put us behind the eight ball in terms of why we're seeing what we see today. Step one is rate increases. I think that's always going to be the step to try to get back to where we need to get to. Unfortunately, especially on the property side, history tells us that step two is possibly a coverage reduction. It's first going to start with deductibles, which has been in the works for years. Name storm deductibles, wind and hail deductibles, 1% to 2% to 5%, etc. Getting away from flat deductibles to percentage deductibles. We already went through that several years ago. Now we're into the increasing of those percentages. Then we're into the name storm deductibles. So these are the attempts of reducing coverage or putting more skin in the game on the client side. But then there's the big elephant in the room of should we continue as an industry to provide replacement cost coverage for a depreciating piece of property, which is the roof. We all know that roofs deteriorate and depreciate over time. We're still playing that game, trying to deal with that. It's not working. It hasn't worked for multiple decades. Nobody wants to jump first. Nobody wants to be the ones that lead that. But we have examples of this. Coverage reduction happened during the mold crisis in the early 2000s. In Texas, we had our own Texas specific forms, the HOA, the HOB, and the HOC. 95% of the business was written on an HOB, which was the broad form. It didn't specifically exclude mold or things that were maintenance oriented. And now we're all on the ISO adopted forms, and mold is excluded and can be bought back on a limited basis. We've done this. We respond as an industry to these scenarios, but we kind of have to feel our way through it.
We had a hailstorm here in the Florida Panhandle a few weeks ago, and that doesn't happen here. I grew up in North Louisiana. It was a very common occurrence, just like it is in Texas. I actually had 2 or 3 friends that reached out to me because they had never seen hail before. And, I had never thought about the fact that it doesn't hail here until it did. And my husband's office is in our sunroom that has a metal roof, and he was actually hosting a call, and he finally came into my office. He's like, we're going to need to switch places because I need your office space. But it was so interesting to me to be in a place that hail is so uncommon. So for our listeners across the country, hail is a really big thing in some places. It's not just an occasional, oh my gosh, this hasn't happened in 6 years kind of thing.
Yeah, there's hurricane season, and in Texas, there's hail season, the spring storms. Certainly the lines that have always been up through Oklahoma, Kansas, and carried over, and we've seen terrible, terrible tornado outbreaks in places like Mississippi and Alabama. I think that we have increased storms. We have some severity increased things going on there. We have some frequency things going on there. We have climate change. I know that's happening, but we've always had some climate change.
We have data that everything is cyclical.
We do. We know this. I think the big thing that has changed here, and this is where we're behind the eight ball here, is that a tornado would touch down or a hailstorm would happen, and it just didn't take out a whole neighborhood. It didn't take out a master planned community. It didn't take out a whole town. That is the thing that's changed over the last probably 2 to 3 decades, is just development. In certain parts of the country, we just have massive development that, by the way, increased interest rates haven't slowed down. There are just incredible developments in the South going on, and I just think there's a lot more property in the way of these storms than there was 3-4 decades ago.
I think the insurance industry is actually a catalyst on that because it is so difficult to get insurance and so expensive on older homes that it's actually cheaper, even in this economy, to do a new build.
Sure, that's a great point. We are initiating that. That is one of the reasons that I'm such an advocate for the right rate for the risk. I'm not a supplemental guy. I don't like auto supplementing home or home supplementing auto. I'm also not a product manager, and I don't even pretend to be a semi-pro product manager. I have thoughts, I have opinions, but I don't have access to some of the data that I believe some of the product people have at the carrier level. But I've never met a product manager that wasn't interested in doing some things around either rate increases or improving and expanding their loss cost scenario or doing some clawback of coverage somewhere. Most of the product managers are not marketers.
We know that I am newer to the industry. So when we're talking about home supplementing auto and auto supplementing home, explain that to me, please.
Yeah, so for years and years, insurance companies that were multi-line that wrote both auto and home, for years, they would allow their home rates to stay somewhat depressed, and they would use auto premium profits to support those losses on the home line. That was a really normalized thing because they wanted the whole account stickiness, back to things we talk about, policy per customer. Home premiums were a little more of you don't have to carry home insurance unless you have a mortgage on it. And so to entice people to carry home insurance because they had to carry auto insurance in most states by law, they would supplement that almost like a loss leader in a way. If you're a marketer and you're a product person of merchandising, it was kind of the insurance industry's way of having a loss leader. And probably about 20 years ago, I know in my experience on a carrier council at the national level, a carrier come out and said, we are not going to do that. We've done that for years. It doesn't work. One specific carrier that I'm aware of during this stretch of time that they were explaining to agents was unprofitable in homeowners insurance 18 out of 20 years. That's not sustainable, but they were supplementing that loss by auto insurance profitability. And so they separated that. They said, we're not going to do that. Everybody's got to stand on their own 2 feet. If you've got a product line out there, homeowners has got to be profitable in and of itself. Auto has to be profitable in and of itself. RV, boat, in and of itself, et cetera, et cetera. We started seeing that really and truly with Progressive's incredible pricing approach. And Progressive was really, really good at this. Late 90s, early 2000s, still are to this day. Probably one of the best in the country at pricing sophistication. And they would not allow this to happen. They were making sure that they were going to make a profit on a product, not let one product supplement another product. I think that was a correction that the industry needed to make, and it was made. There has been some behind the scenes movement to go back there, and I think it kind of has us caught off guard. When I go back to the mold crisis in the early 2000s, when you go back and look over the last 20 years, home insurance on average has almost tripled. But the problem with that stat to me is that the average home insurance premium across the country in 2002 was something like $500 a year. Holy cow. That is so stinking cheap. I don't know how we ever made a profit on homeowners insurance. It's the long tail cycle of the industry, and it's so important to understand and not repeat these problems. And just to think about the fact that we were selling average home insurance premiums of $500 across the country 20 years ago, it didn't make sense then. And that's why we're behind the 8 ball. That's why we still have work to do. I know our average book of business that I looked at just in the last 30 days, our average home insurance premium has jumped above $2,000 for the first time ever, which was a significant milestone. Average home insurance premium. The key indicator there is average.
Why don't you share some resources that if our listeners want more information and really want to dive in, where do you get your stuff?
One of your favorite places is also one of my favorite places, the III, the Insurance Information Institute. First and foremost, just huge resource of data and information on the insurance industry. So big fan of III. And then the other one that would probably be more economic outlook that I would brag on. And no, I don't have an NIL deal or a sponsorship with this organization, but I've been reading their stuff for probably 20 years now. I've very rarely seen them wrong, and it's called the Kiplinger letter. It's a little bit of everything, but mostly economy. These guys, they're kind of the masters of cutting through the political stuff and getting to the real meat of things, to really understanding what's going on and indications where trends are leading us. And they'll make some predictions, and they very rarely miss their predictions. If they do miss, it's not by much. They'll say from time to time things like their expected inflation rate by the end of first quarter 2024 is X. They'll make some predictions and they'll do some things like that, see some trends. It's a weekly letter. There is a digital option, but it's a weekly old school printed letter that is in the form of a little booklet that probably has a total front and back of about 4 pages on average, and it is $100 a year. It's less than one of your streaming services.
It's less than your Starbucks every week.
It is definitely less than your Starbucks every week. 52 letters, 52 weeks in a year. The Kiplinger letter. I just think it's important. I just think that it's put out good stuff. Some of it is too in the weeds for me, and I don't read every single word of every single week, but I will scan the headlines. I will kind of look at the different sections and go, yeah, that interests me. No, I don't care about that. It's just important if you own a business, and most of you out there either own a business or you want to own a business. And I just think as business owners, it gives you so much information that you can use and make decisions on.
I'm going to leave the information for that on our social media to help send you in the right direction. So we're moving back to Shane, the semi-professional economist. Tell us what the next 6 months to a year looks like.
Well, I got burned making this prediction a year ago. So you put me back on the hot seat. I actually said I felt like, mid-year 2023, we were going to kind of be in a better place. I didn't specifically say that I thought it was the economy. I just said we, and I got interpreted as insurance industry. And I forgot about the fact that the insurance industry typically lags the general economy because we kind of take our cues from that. And to go out on a limb and not be a fence rider, I really feel like what we're going to see from the insurance industry is we're going to see some continued price increases through the end of the year, some serious discussions going on at the carrier levels with coverage review and coverage, especially around roofs and ACV on the roof side. And then I think what we're going to see because of these indications with the economy, I think we're into the first quarter, second quarter of 2024 before we start really seeing carrier stabilization. I think we're doing a ton of work today that is going to benefit us in 2024, particularly the second half of 2024. But I think we're going to see some continued retraction, some hard market continuation. It's going to be a little longer of a hard market than we've had historically. But I believe that's because of how unique we have it with the pandemic, with what we did around and what happened with the inflation side of things. Of course, the asterisk of all of this prediction is that 2024 is an election year. And so as we start seeing things like nominations and who the nomination is for different parties and whether things continue to go down that same path, I think that could also sway us one side or the other.
My one prediction for 2024 is that halfway through the year, gas prices will start to go down because it's an election year and it happens every year.
Every year. We got you on record.
I'm going to leave us today with this quote from Vince Lombardi. Perfection is not attainable, but if we chase perfection, we can catch excellence.
Attitude's a choice. Make a great one.
Bye, y'all.
Ready to get the ball rolling with your independent agency? Learn more at IntegraAgent.com. That's IntegraAgent.com. Thank you for joining us on IA Forward. Make sure you never miss a show by clicking the subscribe button now or learn more at IAForward.com.